Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving headfirst into a wildly chaotic, seriously consequential 24-hour global news cycle. Looking closely at the events of June 21st, 2026, we get a snapshot that perfectly captures the sharp, sometimes dizzying contrasts of our modern world. From international flashpoints to massive domestic triumphs, the shifting dynamics are huge, but we're going to break it all down clearly and logically for you.
Okay, here's what we're looking at today. First, Middle East peace and conflict. Next, elections and leadership shakeups. Then, environment and public safety. And finally, world sports and culture. Let's get right into it.
Starting off with Section 1, Middle East peace and conflict, and the high-stakes diplomacy unfolding right now.
We're starting off in Bergen-Stock, Switzerland. Out of nowhere, this place has become the absolute epicenter for international peace efforts. We're looking at a crucial quadrilateral summit, 80 minutes of intense face-to-face talks. On the U.S. side, we've got Vice President J.D. Vance and Jared Kushner. Sitting across from them, Iran's lead negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf, and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. And right in the middle, trying to bridge this massive divide, are mediators from Qatar and Pakistan. This whole setup is essentially laying the groundwork for what's going to be a highly tense week of technical negotiations.
But, these talks hit a wall almost immediately because of a massive clash in diplomatic styles. On one hand, you have Iran playing hardball with rigid sequencing. They're demanding a strict focus on Clause 13 of their memorandum. What does that mean for us? Basically, no discussions about nuclear limitations until the U.S. hands over total sanctions relief and unfreezes their assets. On the flip side, the U.S. is leaning heavily into aggressive, informal rhetoric. President Donald Trump took to social media with a blunt warning, saying the U.S. will, quote, hit Iran very hard again if proxies in Lebanon aren't reined in. So you've got this wild collision of strict bureaucratic demands slamming right into blunt threats.
Now, while things stall in Switzerland, tensions are really flaring up in the Persian Gulf. 17 million. That's a huge number, right? That is the exact number of barrels of oil that just safely made it through the highly strategic Strait of Hormuz. Hardline Iranian military factions had actually claimed they blockaded the strait, but U.S. Central Command pushed back hard on that. They confirmed that 55 commercial merchant vessels passed through safely under heavy American surveillance. And why does this matter to you? Well, this vital flow of energy directly dictates global gas prices. So, despite all the rhetorical crossfire, that oil is still flowing.
Moving a bit further west, the picture shifts entirely. After a weekend of intense escalation, a newly brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah actually looks like it's holding across southern Lebanon. It's stabilizing. As a sign of things cooling down, the Israeli military announced they're lifting movement restrictions for civilians near the northern border by Monday morning. But, and this is a big caveat, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is keeping a very firm autonomous stance. He's vowed to keep Israeli forces entrenched in their established security zone until any localized threat is completely wiped out.
However, beneath all the diplomatic agreements and troop movements, there's a staggering human cost we absolutely can't ignore. The Lebanese Health Ministry just updated their official records, and the reality is grim. Fatalities in this localized conflict since late February have officially crossed the 4,000 mark. 4,000! It's a deeply sobering fact, and it really grounds the sheer urgency of all the diplomatic efforts we were just talking about.
Moving on to Section 2, Elections and Leadership Shakeups, where we'll look at some shifting power dynamics.
Let's see how these shifting dynamics build into global civil order. Petro out. That was the chant echoing through the streets of Bogotá, Colombia. As the runoff election results started rolling in, massive crowds just flooded the city, honking horns, celebrating in the streets. But this wasn't just a victory parade. It was a loud, visceral release of frustration over inflation and stagnant economic policies under the outgoing progressive president, Gustavo Petro. Interestingly, Petro did sow some seeds of doubt regarding the validity of the final margins, though he didn't offer explicit evidence to back that up.
So let's break down this razor-thin election. Conservative outsider Abelardo de la Espriella, who goes by the nickname The Tiger, clinched the victory. His main pitch to voters? A heavy-handed, Bukele-style approach to crime, complete with dismantling cartels and building mega-prisons. He narrowly edged out progressive Senator Ivan Cepeda, who was basically running on a continuation of the current administration's policies. This is a monumental shift to the right for South American politics, and it's driven directly by voters demanding profound, immediate changes to the economy and law enforcement.
Meanwhile, across the pond in the UK, the political pressure cooker is also reaching a boiling point. But the reaction is completely different. Defiant in Downing Street.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer held a high-profile press conference to firmly reject the mounting internal pressure to step down, despite severe blowback over domestic policies and growing fractures within his own party wings. Starmer flat-out refused to walk away from his post. It's a truly fascinating look at a leader just digging his heels in amid intense domestic pushback.
All right, that brings us to Section 3, Environment and Public Safety, focusing on localized crises.
Stepping away from the global political stage, we need to focus on some very real, immediate emergencies happening on the ground. Federal disaster agencies have laid out the exact sequence of environmental triggers that are sparking devastating fires across the American West right now. It's essentially a recipe for disaster. You take unseasonably high heat, combine it with plunging, low humidity, and then add in a severe, widespread drought. Mix those three together, and boom, you get fast-moving, highly destructive wildfires. The National Weather Service is actively pushing out emergency warnings as this exact formula plays out across multiple western states today.
In another sobering local update, this time concerning public safety, we have to look at Chicago. Over the weekend, local law enforcement and medical centers were pushed to their absolute breaking points following a devastating wave of violence. The tragic result? At least 7 people slain and dozens more hospitalized with severe ballistic trauma. It's a very stark reminder of the intense daily challenges testing our domestic emergency and medical resources right now.
Finally, we arrive at Section 4, World, Sports, and Culture, looking at moments of unity and celebration.
To wrap up today's explainer, we're shifting gears completely to the unifying, energetic, and, let's be real, sometimes purely chaotic power of global sports and culture. Let's start with a massive win for the host nation. The U.S. men's national soccer team is officially bound for the knockout stage. In a truly thrilling, high-stakes match right on home soil, they pulled off a huge victory against international heavyweight Australia. It's an incredible moment for this expanded 48-team FIFA World Cup, and it's pumping an immense surge of energy right into the American sports landscape.
Now, the sheer logistical scale of this global tournament is absolutely wild. We're not just talking about the players here, we have to talk about the fans. Over 30,000 Scottish supporters have essentially taken over the streets of Boston ahead of upcoming matches. It's an unbelievable visual, just an absolute sea of tartan everywhere you look. But, get this, this massive influx of people has completely drained local venue supply lines and overwhelmed the hospitality industry. I guess it proves you should never ever underestimate a Scottish football fan's ability to run a pub dry, right? It's a staggering and honestly kind of hilarious example of the real-world economic impact of these massive cultural events.
In total contrast to those rowdy sports fans, thousands of people found a completely different way to celebrate right in the middle of New York City. For the annual Solstice in Times Square event, marking the official start of summer, massive crowds gathered in the Broadway pedestrian plazas. But they weren't there cheering for a goal. No, they were taking part in 7 massive free outdoor mindfulness yoga sessions. It is such a wild juxtaposition, right? Finding total zen and quiet mindfulness in the dead center of literally one of the loudest, busiest intersections on the planet.
Which brings us to our final takeaway. From tense nuclear posturing and aggressive diplomacy in Switzerland, all the way to 30,000 Scottish soccer fans celebrating and draining the taps in Boston, how exactly does our global ecosystem balance such extreme fragility with immense resilience, all within a single 24-hour cycle? I want to leave you with that provocative thought. It just goes to show how rapidly our world can pivot from existential threats to joyous celebrations. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.